he finally showed up. Like, brother, you just missed 2 weeks of class. Ain't no way you're going to pass this class now, right?
Okay.
Well, my brother got shot. You know, how was it that your brother got shot? By who? By the police. I literally called up my best friend and I told her, meet me in the middle. And she met me in the middle campus that same day. And I said, I'm going to law school. I always say I'm not a civil rights litigator. I am a civil rights protector.
Okay.
And I mean that to my core. I take the Constitution in this country very seriously, as we all do. But I take very seriously also the notion that we live in the best country in this world. And I think that's a very beautiful thing too about Latinos family. This sense of familial obligation and see that doesn't hit right because it's not obligation. It's this beautiful, okay, what am I going to do to contribute to the family to ensure that my family continues to do well and be well? That's what you need of me. Sounds good. Say less. Here we go.
So we're so very excited to have with us today Denisse Gastélum, who is one of the premier civil rights attorneys in the entire state of California. Her law firm, that's right, her law firm, Gastélum Law, focuses on representing victims of civil rights and police misconduct cases. And she specializes in police shootings, jail deaths, sexual abuse, and wrongful death cases. Denisse has received countless awards and has been recognized by just about every legal organization in the state of California, including the Consumer Attorneys of California Street Fighter of the Year Award in 2022, the prestigious Hispanic National Bar Association's Top 40 Award in 2021, and she was recognized by the National Trial Lawyers Association as one of the top 100 civil plaintiffs' attorneys in the country. Denisse's activism extends beyond the courtroom. Denisse is the current president of the California La Raza Lawyers Association, as well as past president of the Mexican American Bar Association and Latina Lawyers Bar Association. Denisse also currently sits on the board of directors of the National Police Accountability Project and the American Civil Liberties Union of Southern California, to name a few. On today's episode of The Art of Purpose, Denisse will share with us her inspirational journey toward finding her purpose. We'll hear about Denisse's incredible and resilient story, one of humble beginnings that started in East Los Angeles to an immigrant family, to a powerhouse attorney taking on the largest organizations and government bodies in the country as part of her commitment to advocating and protecting the civil liberties of her people and her community. Hello, Denisse, and welcome to The Art of Purpose.
Kenny, buenos dias. I appreciate you inviting me to be here today. The Art of Purpose. I mean, geez Louise, how did I get here? How am I here in front of you on this podcast? Thank you, Kenny. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely. And thank you for taking the time. You are an incredibly busy woman, incredibly busy attorney. You were on the news. I was telling you earlier that my mom was saying yesterday when we told her we were going to interview you, and she said, I saw her on TV this week, right? You're doing a lot of great work for people, and thank you for making the time to be with us today. I asked you to bring something that meant, something that was meaningful to you, and I know that you brought a little something. Can you tell us what that is?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a lot of trinkets, actually, right and on my desk in my office, and I was like, which is the one that's going to come with me? I actually got this. It says, no dream is ever too big. Right? And I actually got this from a very dear friend of mine, one of my high school best friends, when I started at UCLA, geez Louise, back in 2005, which would be almost 20 years ago. I am now showing my age.
No, well, no, you are not. You look like you're younger than me, so no, don't say that.
Anyway, but what's interesting is certainly it's from a dear friend, but also because it has came with me every single gig, every single job I've had since 2005. I have always made sure to have it in my desk right underneath the monitor to kind of keep me focused and to remind me that no dream is ever too big. And so fast forward almost 20 years ago, here I am, the owner of my own law firm, right? And I'm sure we're going to talk about that just a bit here, but pretty big deal.
Yeah.
Sometimes you kind of forget, the journey that you've been on. And I think it's a beautiful thing to sit there and, dare I say, objectively try to be perhaps a third party into your life and say, like, you go, girl. You own your law firm.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
No,
you know?
absolutely.
Yeah.
No dream is ever too big. I love that. And what it says about your friend and about you and who you were at that time, right? A high school friend that I imagine the types of dreams that you had already and what she saw in you and what you were hoping for as well. What has that meant to you, I guess, in the moment, but as you said, you've taken it everywhere that you've gone. Are you a person that dreams big?
I am.
Yeah.
I like to, yeah, absolutely. In a beautiful sense, right? Because I feel like sometimes it might have a negative connotation when you're a dreamer, right? It's kind of like, oh, get back to reality, put your feet back on reality. Like, what can you really truly achieve? I think I am a dreamer. And I think that what's beautiful too is 20 years ago, again, that was given to me. And I've had several dreams where sometimes perhaps I didn't, is it reach the dream? I'm not exactly sure, but a realization that perhaps that wasn't my dream. And let's, redirect the dream, if you will, right? But at least my point is I have always allowed myself to think of a future or a trajectory that is above and beyond my wildest dreams. And then I might set my path towards that dream.
Yeah. And I love that because I think it's so important for young people to understand and that, yes, have big dreams and go for it. And sometimes there are moments in life where you have to pivot or change direction a little bit, but that's not a bad thing, that maybe your path led you into something better even than when you had originally planned. I love that. Okay, so speaking about dreaming big and kind of where you got started, I want to get into your beginnings when, little Denisse, your family, and all of that. But before we do that, can you tell us just a little bit of the type of work that you do nowadays so that people can get an understanding? Because, people think attorneys and they think courtroom and what they see on TV, right? And that's it. But you do a very specific type of work that is very important and needed and has been historically throughout the, the entire duration of our country, something that's been needed, advocating and protecting people's civil liberties. Can you tell us about the type of work that you do?
Absolutely. I am a very, very, very proud civil rights attorney. I always say I'm not a civil rights litigator. I am a civil rights protector, right? And I mean that to my core. I take the Constitution in this country very seriously, as we all do. But and I take very seriously also the notion that we live in the best country in this world, right? This is America.
You're here,
right? Exactly. Whereas in certain spaces you might say that, and there might be some pushback. But think about it: the platform is there for it to truly be the best country in the whole wide world, the best place to live in the whole wide world. Dare I say, even the universe, right? But it's folks like me, I like to think, that ensures that it is really, truly the best place to live, right? And what do I mean by that? I defend folks' constitutional rights, right? I go up against not just the most important, the most powerful institution, governmental body, if you will, in this country, right? And that's law enforcement. And unlike, for example, the Department of Children and Family Services, unlike Social Security Administration, law enforcement can knock on your door. And if things don't go right, you could be dead within 2 seconds. And I hate to say it that cold, but that's the reality, right? And so, again, as a civil rights attorney, as a civil rights protector, my focus is on law enforcement accountability and even more specifically on police shootings and on in-custody death cases. So police shootings, of course, I mean, it's in the name there, officer-involved shootings, or even excessive force where it doesn't result in a death or didn't even involve the shooting. It could just be, for example, a beating of a fellow member of the public. In-custody death cases are usually ones I like to explain because people don't really understand and or perhaps appreciate that incarcerated folks in this country have rights, and they have very real rights. As an example, if you are a inmate in a local jail who suffers from mental health issues, who suffers from suicidal ideations. Our Constitution says that you have to be provided with mental health care when you're in the government's custody. We're not going to let you die on it. Right? We're going to help you. Or, for example, inmate violence cases. There are inmates that belong to vulnerable communities, whether it might be a transgendered female, it might be an elderly gentleman, right? It might be a homosexual individual, a person with HIV, fill in the blank. There's just basically categories of vulnerable inmates, right? And so the government has to provide them with protection, right? There's of course deaths that I do, for example, an individual who might have diabetes and they just fail to provide them with insulin. A person who has epilepsy, they fail to give them their seizure medication, if you will. That's what I specialize in. It's police shootings and then in custody death cases.
Thank you for that. That's a lot, and I know that you do a lot. And I love how you said that, our country is the best, but best also doesn't mean that it's perfect, right? And it's people like you that ensure that we keep working towards that idealized version of who we can be as a country. All right. I want one more follow-up on that based on something that you said, and kind of made me think. A lot of times people can ask, if they think of like public defenders or criminal defense attorneys, how can you defend somebody who's a criminal, right? Somebody who got accused of this stuff. Sometimes you're dealing a lot with individuals who are incarcerated, right? So a lot of the natural reaction of people is, how can you represent people who are behind prison, who are in jail, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's very important for many reasons, right? How do you respond to somebody like that and help them understand why it's so important to protect everybody, right? No matter what, and that civil liberties and rights are protected.
Right. And there's this beautiful quote, and it's interesting, I actually don't even know the author, but it basically says something to the effect of, I am not my worst mistake. And so when I think about folks who are incarcerated, who I represent, and mind you, I typically represent the family of that incarcerated individual because they have died in custody. I truly believe that to my core, that they weren't their worst mistake. Whatever it is that resulted in them being in the government's custody is neither here nor there to me, right? And another way to also see this type of work is the Constitution. If you can't defend it for your brothers and sisters in any category, right? Whether it might be a murderer, it might be even an individual who might be accused of child molestation. Who's to say that if you are ever wrongfully accused of something, that folks are going to treat you that way? And that's that's also one of the cornerstones of this beautiful country, right? Innocent, until proven guilty. Most of my folks, I will say, are pretrial detainees, so they are innocent men and women under the eyes of the law. The standards there are much higher because obviously as presumed innocent men and women, the government has to give them heightened rights. But anyway, those are just some things that do come to mind. Yeah,
no, it's perfect because that is the reality, is that if we don't do it correctly all the time, and if we allow shortcuts, when we allow our own judgments or whatever preconceived biases that we come in with certain groups of people, who's to say that's not going to start bleeding into the general population, right? So making sure that the rules and the laws are protected and rights are protected for everybody equally. And I think that's the noble work that you do in so many different ways. All right, so Denisse is the protector of civil rights and fighting for people, and you're out on TV all the time, and it's amazing to see you out there fighting for people. And yet we have humble beginnings, right? In East Los Angeles, an immigrant family from Mexico. Can you tell us a little bit about that, growing up in that family? What was that like? 'Cause nobody can look at my past and think, oh, he was going to become an attorney, right? And nobody could look at that and say that that's where I was heading, right? And I imagine it was very similar to you as well. So, but all of my background helped inform who I am today and the way that I represent my clients.
Absolutely.
And I know that's the same for you. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? What was it like growing up in East Los Angeles with your family, or the importance of your parents in your life, and all that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so I was born in East Los Angeles to an immigrant family from Mexico. Our roots are from the beautiful states of Sinaloa and Chihuahua, Mexico. Certainly a very proud Mexican I am. I think when I rolled up in here, my headphones, I had the Sinaloense on.
Of course.
I did.
Yes, you did.
Yeah, and I have, 4 of us, 4 kids, 2 beautiful parents. My mother was a stay-at-home mom and a very dedicated stay-at-home mom. Lunch, dinner, and breakfast she had always made sure that we had our abrigos with us when we left the house. Truly an amazing woman. My father was a hard worker. He was a manager of a used car dealership. He was a very, very, very good car salesman, so much so that when I was about 7 years old, he moved us to a good community, if you will. Of course, East LA is a good community during those times, so dare I say that, perhaps the gang started knocking on the door, if you will. I have 2 older brothers, and think my dad kind of started looking around and said, you know what, I'm going to get my kids on out of here. Yeah. The better community, or safer community. Yeah. So he moved us to the Inland Empire, Chino Hills. Oh. Yeah. The hills of Chino, as they say. So I moved there when I was about 7 years old, and this new big house that we had, a beautiful community, never heard sirens at night, never heard helicopters at night. It was beautiful. The only thing that it wasn't was inviting to a little 7-year-old Mexican kid who hadn't fully transitioned to the English language yet. So back in the day, parents had the option, particularly like in East LA, Southgate, etc., to keep your children in Spanish curriculum, right? So you could learn that native tongue of yours, read and write and speak it. Yeah. And then they would slowly start transitioning English into the curriculum, and that would be around 2nd grade. Well,
that's when you moved.
That's when I moved. So, my white teachers, I always remember, I think it was like arguably the first 2 weeks of being at this new school, a white teacher, she screamed her head off at me, and I didn't really quite comprehend what the heck she was yelling at me about.
You had no idea what was going on.
Yeah, because I failed to, it was a school bus that we had to color in according to the colors that were printed on this little page, if you will.
Yeah.
And I didn't understand that, for example, yellow meant I have to grab my crayon, get amarillo in my head, and start coloring. So I did things wrong, and she was so upset. Because of this language barrier, they told my parents, particularly my father, who did speak English, that I had a learning disability, and they wanted to hold me back. And my father was like, she was on a roll. She was like top of her class for all, out where we were living at. She was the person who would hand out the stars to other kids. Like, how did we get here? Yeah. She just doesn't understand English. Give her a shot. So then he promised them, look, over the summer she's going to learn English. Just don't hold her back. That summer, I went to the library every day, and I actually tell this story often, but it's interesting. Yeah, I read Hansel and Gretel like 1,000 times. I only read that book like every day at the library until the word taje rolled off my tongue as the. Yeah. Anyway, and then, started 3rd grade, and I was back to being the rock star that I was.
Can I stop you there for a
Yeah.
moment there? So, okay, so you moved to Chino Hills in second grade. Was this the beginning of second grade, in the middle of the school year? Do you remember?
It was April.
It was April. Oh,
So I guess it's 2.5 months.
yeah. So you were almost finishing,
Yeah.
essentially. Okay. So they want to hold you. Oh, they wanted to hold you back. Your dad says, "Hey, like I promise, she's going to learn English over the summer." And you were going to the library. Is that, nowadays finding books, going online is so much easier. I imagine then your mother was taking you to the library, your father, every single day?
Yeah, there's
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then again, my mom was a stay-at-home mom. She was very active in our lives.
That's a beautiful thing.
Beautiful thing, and a very lucky thing as well, right? What if I had two working parents? Things might have not gone so well for me.
Yeah.
But I do remember that was the first, and I'm going to say it that way because I felt that way. And if you ask my mom, my father passed away, so you can't ask my father. I always had this about me, like, that's an injustice. Like, that's not fair.
Mm-hmm.
Why do they get to say XYZ about me when that's not correct and that's not the truth? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I remember feeling that way,
Yeah.
right? That it was so unfair the way they were treating me. I couldn't articulate it. I mean, call a spade, that was racism.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
But that for sure, I think, was the first injustice, if you will, that was a very personal thing to me. And that inspired me at that moment to, certainly not as a second grader, but you understand, the wheel started spinning. And if you fast forward to when I was at UCLA, I actually wanted to be a school psychologist that focused on language barriers for ESL kids, right?
That all started from that experience.
Right. And it's because of, and once I was at UCLA as an undergrad, I was doing a lot of tutoring.
Well, you know what? I know that you have a lot there. Before we get there, can I ask you? So we have that second grade experience. From then on through high school, did you find yourself drawn? I know that you mentioned right now in college you wanted to be a school psychologist. Did you find yourself drawn to trying to help out immigrant families, or trying to looking at unfairnesses and trying to do something about that, or kind of what was your experience as you kept going through high school?
Through high school, well,
and it's not something that you had to be doing. I mean, we're kids, right? But
no. And when I was 15, and I'll never forget too, because it was making tea, and I remember looking at my dad and realizing that he wasn't well. Like, he looked, he was this beautiful brown skin. He was a moreno, and he looked yellow. So for somebody with beautiful dark brown skin to look yellow says a lot about their health. When I was 15, he got really ill with congestive heart failure and diabetes, and he became permanently disabled. And his job fired him. Right at that point, he was probably working with them for about 20 years. And
as a car salesman?
As a car salesman, only 2 days off a month, would leave at 8 a.m., wouldn't come back till 10 p.m. every single day, aside from those 2 days off a month that he had. And they fired him. All right. So this, life of ours where we're now in this beautiful community, we're all excelling, living the American dream, if you will. Now we have a father who's sick, who lost his job. At 15, I started working, I would say, since the age of 15, frankly, with the exception of the 2 bars that I took to get the art license, I have arguably worked more than 30 hours a week. Anyway, so my point is, when I started at 15, I started working 30-hour weeks. So a lot of my focus was not playing sports, not coming a lot of community volunteering, because I had to go to school and then get my butt to work.
Yeah.
Sometimes coming home literally at like 2 a.m. from work.
Where'd you work?
Baskin Robbins. And within like 2 months, I was a manager. So.
Yeah, of course you were.
Of course I would.
How many franchises did you own by 17?
I ran like 3 regions. I'm kidding. No.
So wow. So you're working. Yeah, and I can't I mean, I didn't, and I can't imagine doing that and going to school and, excelling as well. What did that period, and so you did that be out of family responsibility, right? You needed to help the family.
Right.
What did that do to you at 15 years old to have to take on that responsibility? Because that's not something most kids have to do.
Right.
How do you, looking back on, Denisse and your whole life, and how did that begin to sort of instill responsibility or even, understanding family and
Right.
how you apply it to your career now?
Right. What's interesting is a lot of folks ask me that question, and, you and I are very similar in that sense. I took it as a right of privilege, if you will, as I am part of this family unit. I'm going to get out there and work to ensure that we keep this house, that we have food over our table. Mind you, my 2 older brothers went to work as well.
Yeah.
My sister at the time was 10 years old, clearly not. But my mother, who was also a stay-at-home, she started working for the first time in her life as well. And I think that's a very beautiful thing, too, about Latinos families. This sense of familial obligation. And see, that doesn't hit right because it's not obligation. It's this beautiful, okay, what am I going to do to contribute to the family to ensure that my family continues to do well and be well? That's what you need of me. Sounds good. Say less. Here we go. Truly.
Yeah.
Right? So I never took it as a burden. And I'm not saying other folks might see it as a burden, but I sure as heck didn't see it as a burden. It was just my new reality.
Yeah.
And that's all right. And some of my best friends were cheerleaders. They played softball and they did XYZ. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I just would go to work after school.
Yeah.
Different life for me. Yeah.
I think that's beautiful. I felt like a tear coming on too in the way that you're describing that, because you're right. Sometimes it can be seen as a responsibility, an obligation, right? Something that's a burden. And I think, look, things happen in life, and they can be very hurtful and traumatic even. And then the question is, what can I do now, right? And continue to move forward, and helping out family, doing what you did at 15 years old is amazing. And that you took it as something of a badge of honor, because it is your community. You get to help. And I think I remember the first time I was able to do that, with family. You're like, wow, like, I love my family and I want to do this, right? Who was the fact that your dad was a car salesman and excelled at it tells me a lot about the negotiation and salesmanship that Denisse has in a great way, because like those are skills that, wow. Can you tell us a little bit about who your dad was and what you learned from him? And I know that somebody meant the world to you.
Yeah, he sure did. He still does. My father, literally the greatest man I've ever known. Juan Leonardo Gastélum, he'd go by Lalo. He was, what's interesting, what happened to my brothers and I, my sister was so young, so, he did that for his family. And that's just so interesting. I don't know why, but I just realized that. He did that for his family. My grandfather was ill as well. And my father was the eldest of 4 boys. And when my grandfather was ill, he at that time owned 2 car dealerships. My father, I think, was about 18 or so. He chose to stay back and not go to college to make sure that his younger brothers went to college. And he went and helped my grandfather run the family business. And certainly got into a business that would then certainly, affect his health, right? And ultimately lead to a premature death, right? But he did that whenever he would speak about that with pride and no questions asked. Like, of course, I am the oldest of a beautiful Mexican family. And I'm going to make sure I help my father, who's ill. You guys go to school.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And anyway, that's something I always remember about him, particularly his work ethic. He was a very kind man. He was a very caring man. He was funny. His doors were always open to anybody who needed a hot plate, who needed to stay the night, things of that nature. He was simply the best. He really, really was. Yeah.
It really does sound like it. Wow. And his work sort of ethic of getting up really early in the morning and coming home late, I think now we see that. I always tell people that one of our superpowers as coming from underrepresented groups, from my perspective, obviously as a Latino, but this certainly applies to many immigrant groups and just many different folks. But it's hard. It's the work ethic, right? Because then we saw our parents working all these sort of physical, sometimes laborious jobs or that required all their time. But then you bring that to the legal world, right? And that we have an office, there's air conditioning, and it gives perspective. But I know that you get up really early and you stay up really late working, and you're definitely continuing the legacy of your father. So,
no, absolutely. I always say that with opposing counsel, I'm like, I don't care how smart you think you are. I don't care where it is you think you got. Where it is that you graduate from law school, I will outwork you.
Yep.
Unequivocally, I will outwork you. And that's a beautiful thing. I think work ethic. When I ever look for folks who are going to join my firm, frankly, I'm married now to a very great, beautiful man. But I remember even when I was looking for a partner, work ethic was important to me. It said a lot about the individual, I think.
Yeah. All right. So, moving on to UCLA, you started talking about your undergrad experience, and you go and you wanted to be a school psychologist. So at this point, law, being a lawyer,
right.
Going up against law enforcement, protecting people, you haven't even thought about that. You haven't considered anything like that. You want to be a school psychologist. And I understand that you were majoring in psychology, minoring in political science and philosophy. Well, no, education. And at some point, all of that shifted or changed, right? Can you talk to us kind of leading up to that change and then what happened?
Right. Okay, so when I started at UCLA, I was a psych major, again, school psychology. And then with that emphasis of language barriers to assist, to help, students who are ESL, English as a second language, right? And the more I was taking classes, particularly like the upper, like your third and fourth year at college, you start to explore. I started taking classes that spoke to, for example, like race, gender, socioeconomic status, women's rights, certainly, Chicano rights, African-American rights, fill in the blank. And I started kind of dabbling in political science and education, kind of creating this like critical race theory, multidiscipline type of a degree.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah.
And the more I was taking those classes and involved in certain aspects of what that curriculum entailed, for example, being sent out to marginalized communities to do tutoring, to teach XYZ.
The school was sending you to those places?
Well, I belong to like certain mentorship programs, or some of the education classes that I had as part of the minor. Part of the curriculum, or like a class credit, was to go and tutor 8 hours, I don't know, every 2 weeks at Inglewood High School type thing, right? And the more I started getting out into the community, the more I started seeing additional injustices, right? One specific class, and that was at Inglewood High School. Inglewood High School, at that time, and I'm sure it's about, I'd argue, 60% Latino and 40% Black, right? I was assigned a trigonometry class where I had to teach trigonometry in Spanish. Yeah. And it was give or take about 15 students. They were all obviously the ages 15, 14, 16, let's say. All spoke Spanish.
And by the way, trig?
Trig. I'm actually so good at math.
Yeah, no, I bet you are. But like, school psychologist, like, how did you get assigned to teach trig at a high school?
I'm pretty sure when they were giving out assignments, they were like, "Hey, we have some kids that need to be taught a higher level math in Spanish because they had been newly arrived folks.
Yeah.
From like Mexico, El Salvador, etc. And I was like, well, I'm actually really good at math, guys. I could teach it.
You're teaching at a high school, no teaching credentials, none of that, but like you're teaching them.
Yeah.
That's
literally.
amazing. Yeah.
Literally. Which says a lot too,
Yeah.
you
Wow.
see.
There's a lot about you, and then I understand where you're going as
Yeah.
well. Yeah.
No, I remember some of the exams that I saw there. They were literally written in English, and I'm like, these folks speak Spanish. Let's do better, guys.
You experienced that.
Yeah, absolutely. I did. You're right. So again, this one semester, I was assigned this class, and I had 2 experiences, and I was already kind of, I didn't know I was going to go into law, but I knew that something was calling for me that perhaps might not be school psychology. And at that point, I had even taken my GRE. And GRE, you need to go into like math.
Committed.
Oh, I was so committed.
Yeah.
I was so committed.
And so, just so people understand, especially young people, what is the GRE? Why were you taking that? What's the point of that?
Yeah. And it's funny. I don't even know what GRE stands for. However,
I neither do I. We know these difference.
But ultimately, typically folks will take the GRE if you're geared towards, for example, like a PhD program, certainly in school psychology, or GREs, I want to say, if you want to become a teacher, you have to take the GRE. Same as doctors have to take the MCAT. I'm sorry, folks who want to go to medical school have to take the MCAT. Folks who want to go to law school have to take the LSAT. The GRE is kind of for a more general, like master's PhD program. That's, I guess, the best way I could describe it.
Yep.
Yeah. So I'd even taken the GRE. And in this one class, let's say within the span of 8 weeks, I had a student, obviously I'm going to change their names, let's say Jorge, who would come to class and just sleep. Obviously, we're talking about a 15-year-old who looked like he was 40 years old because he just looked tired all the time.
Yeah.
Dark circles, sleeping on time, not turning in homework. And I remember asking him, like, hey, what's going on? Like, you're not going to pass this class this way.
Yeah.
He's like, well, Miss Gastélum, it's because I work. And I remember thinking, well, I work.
Right.
And I still showed up and I was awake and I brought my homework.
Get it together, Jorge.
Exactly. Right. But he just looked like the different type of work of what I was doing. Mind you, sometimes I would come home at 2 a.m. He's like, well, sometimes I would come home until about 4 a.m. And I'm already thinking, like, you're a 15-year-old kid. You ain't got no business working till 4 a.m. most nights.
Yeah.
I'm like, well, where do you work at? A factory. Okay, well, do you get paid? Yeah, sometimes. What do you get paid? Oh, $3 an hour, type thing. And because I was already taking so many classes that spoke to social injustice, I already knew, well, this is child exploitation, right? Violation of labor laws.
And migrants. I mean, all of that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So layered, you're right, the exploitation there. And then let's say a couple weeks later, the brightest kid in that class didn't show up for about a couple weeks. And let's call him Jose. When he finally showed up, like, brother, you just missed 2 weeks of class. Right. Ain't no way you're going to pass this class now, right? Okay. Well, my brother got shot. And, how was it that your brother got shot? By who? By the police in the back. They mistook him for a game. And I don't know if it was certainly that. I had a knee-jerk reaction to that, feeling the injustice, coupled with my experience with Jorge from a few weeks prior. I literally called up my best friend, Pantea, and I told her, meet me in the middle. And she met me in the middle campus that same day, and I said, I'm going to law school. And she's like, huh? You just took the GRE, girl. Like, you just went and visited some school psychology programs. What? Yeah. And I said, I need a law degree to be able to help my community the best way, in the best possible way. That's the type of backbone I need to actually make a difference for my community. She's like, okay. And at my wedding, she actually even, part of her speech, she talked about this.
Remember that story?
Yeah. And that was arguably because UCLA started quite early. I want to say UCLA starts, no, September. That must have happened early on. No, that was my 4th year. Point is, I then redirected myself and followed the law school path. When, LSAT, and
did all that. What was it about those experiences? And thank you for sharing that. I think those are the type of things that we were talking about earlier, where you have a goal and you have a dream, right? You wanted to be a school psychologist, and that was a big dream, even from where we're coming from,
right.
And I say we're because a lot of your story, I feel like, parallels a lot with our story as well as a family,
Right.
And your dream redirects a little bit. What was it about that particular experience that all of a sudden you said, hey, like, I need to become a lawyer to change to make the change that I want to see? Because certainly you can also do it as in the education system, right? There's a way to address those as well. But why was it the law that you saw as being what you needed to make the change that you wanted to see?
Right. And that's a great question, because ultimately, for example, with with Jose, I didn't right away think I'm going to be a civil rights lawyer and do police misconduct, right? Or even the Jorge situation, I wasn't thinking, and I guess what type of lawyer would that be? I mean, it wouldn't be employment lawyer, because that was ultimately child exploitation,
right?
Human rights. I'm not
right
exactly sure what type of lawyer Jorge needed, but the point is, I didn't right away pinpoint. I just felt that perhaps if I was a lawyer, I could represent them and go against whoever harmed them. And I had that sense about me.
Yeah.
You see? And yeah, I mean, I think that's the best way I could articulate it. I felt that, frankly, I think I knew that I wanted to sue whoever it is that harmed them, because it wasn't criminal behavior per se where I was like, I want to be a prosecutor to put those people in jail. It was more of like, I want to take you to court and hold you accountable for what you're doing to these people. And so the law stood out to me in that sense.
Yeah.
Because as an example in the educational system, and it's true, you could make so much change in the educational system. But even somebody with a PhD in the educational system, what could you do for those two students? Write a very strongly worded letter. And I'm not trying to poo-poo, certainly, but you see how with the law, your voice in a certain venue, obviously a tribunal, matters a little bit more, particularly regarding their harms.
Yeah, and it's very, very targeted sort of help, right? Because you can help that person in that moment, but also have an effect for many other people as well. I'm just fascinated by, and I think this speaks so much in terms of who Denisse is today, right? This amazing attorney and everything that you do for people, but that you felt this sort of, again, responsibility perhaps, but also a desire to help somebody, right? Because sometimes that's not something that people may have or feel that they need to help. Maybe we can identify unfairness or injustice, and somebody else is going to come along and fix that. Right. But what do you, if you kind of look at yourself, from the outside looking in, what was it about maybe your background and everything up to that moment that you think made you say, I need to do something. I need to be the one to do something about this.
Right. Well, I think that they were both Latino kids. Certainly said some, spoke to me in a very different way. I'm not sure if perhaps, the injustice I felt as a 7-year-old regarding somebody questioning my intelligence simply because I didn't speak the same language as them. Even my father being fired, right? Once he was of no use to this company, despite the 60-hour weeks he would give them, right? I don't know if perhaps race started speaking to me in a way that I feel like, I'm not sure, Kenny, I'm sure you probably remember the very moment when you realize that race matters and how perhaps people treat you, how people treat your family members, or how people treat people who look like you. And perhaps at that moment when you have that realization, it's a very sad thing, right? Because usually that implies that you realize what racism is. it's also a very empowering thing, right? Like, you know what? Well, I got a voice. And unfortunately for these people, I'm not afraid to use this voice. So perhaps Jorge can't speak up for himself, but you better believe you're going to hear from me.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. I think I'm still fascinated by that whole period for you in UCLA, and I guess it happened rather quickly, but of how that sort of shifted your entire trajectory as well, and it also I think serves as an inspiration for young people and encourages young people because sometimes going back to what we were discussing in the beginning, dreams, right, and then being able to change and find something that is your calling as well. Mm-hmm. What advice would you have for two things? One, young people that are still looking for their purpose, right? That maybe they don't know. They just maybe graduate high school and I guess I got to go to college, but I still don't know what to do. And then also for people who, like you, perhaps ran into a situation that all of a sudden is changing their trajectory and advice for them in making those choices.
Right. I think particularly looking for your purpose, as human beings, you know what interests you, you know what gets you going, you know what lights up this little fire in you. And perhaps you don't know what it might be. You can't put a name on it. You can't put it into a little category, but you feel it. Right? When something interests you, when you want to keep watching documentaries about XYZ specifically, you want to keep listening to podcasts about XYZ specifically, or with your best friend, you could stay up till 2 a.m. talking about XYZ. I feel like pay attention to what that XYZ is because that's part of your purpose, right? Or certainly could lead you to your purpose.
Yeah.
And I'm great at remembering quotes. I'm even better at botching them. We'll
get the gist of it.
Yeah, it's, do what you love and you never work a day in your life. Truly. I feel when I look, again, these moments where I encourage anybody and everyone to do it as much as possible, to try to be objective about your life and look at your life from this third-party perspective and see where you're at. And I try to do that often just as a reminder to myself. A couple weeks ago literally said out loud, I said, I'm living the dream. I have families who come to me and their loved ones have been harmed, their loved ones have been taken away, and they trust me to do good by their family and to do good by their loved one who passed away. And then I go, and for a year or 2 years, I do really hard work, very difficult work, very important work. And at the end of that year or 2 years, I'm able to come back to that family and say, hey, those failures that led to your loved one passing away, or those wrongdoings that led to your loved one passing away, that criminal behavior that led to your loved one passing away, the truth is out, right? They're going to be held accountable. Whatever that accountability might be. And then I'm also compensated for all of this. Geez Louise, I am living the dream. This is probably how Kobe felt.
Yeah. That's awesome. Yeah, great. Yeah. And it's your firm.
And absolutely. There is nothing like having, and I'm a very proud Mexican, as you know. I am a very proud Gastélum. There's nothing like doing all this work, getting compensated for it, and then having Gastélum outside of that, building, right outside of that door. It just all hits a little differently when you put it into that perspective. Yeah.
That's beautiful. I want to talk about your firm itself and kind of going into that. I know we're coming short on time, so we're going to fast forward just a little bit, but I do want you to talk to us really quickly about sort of your law school experience. I know that, shortly before you started law school is when your father passed away, right? And then you had to confront all of law school and work. And, very rare are the moments in our lives when everything is perfect, right? And it's the perfect circumstances. And I think your story has been one, as we've heard so far, it was challenge, but resilience, and you overcoming all of that. Working from high school, college, law school. I mean, I didn't work my first year of law school. They told us it was impossible, right? Like, don't work. You did it because you had to. Mm-hmm. What was your experience through law school? And I imagine maybe you had a talking to from teachers or professors or, who maybe just tried to dissuade you from working, but you had to. How was your experience through that? And I think there are students who go through that, right? And to hear from somebody who did it successfully, and can you share a little bit about your law school experience?
Absolutely. When I started law school, my father had passed away about 10 months prior to me starting law school. Of course, I was already working, right? Because I had already been working a lot from the age of 15. And my father's death was sudden. As much as he was ill, it was just one heart attack and that's it. Mm-hmm. And so the importance of all of us, my brothers, now my younger sister, and my mother continuing to work was certainly important. That was also during the recession, I want to say, when we started getting into that.
Okay, right.
And I do recall, that's right, I want to say 2008, a few of my folks in the family unit didn't have jobs, not for not wanting, but just because there wasn't jobs. All the more reason why I had to make sure to keep working. And I remember my first semester of law school, I did have a talking to by a counselor who told me that I wasn't allowed to work the first semester of law school according to the ABA rules, the American Bar Association. And that perhaps I think the second semester I could work like 20, something like it, if I got permission, something like that. And I remember thinking that they had no clue what it is that students of color, and dare I say, and stay that narrowed and focused, what students of color have to go through, right? To put these restrictions upon them when they are already, certainly having the toughest year of their life intellectually and academically, right? To admonish them for having to work to ensure that, roof is held over their family's head and that there's food on the table. Perhaps what might have been more prudent on their end and frankly more humane should have been offering me a stipend rather than admonishing me. But I remember thinking that it was so short-sighted and so disconnected from the reality of what students of colors have to face, right? And I told the counselor, respectfully, unless you're going to tell me that you're going to give me XYZ money every 2 weeks to help my mom keep the house, I'm going to keep working. Okay?
You have to.
Yep. Mm-hmm. So, anyway, so I kept working. Not sure if the ABA changed their rules because of Denisse Gastélum sticking up to the counselor. They should. But yeah, no, I kept.
And also, I will say, not to, in all fairness or anything like that, but I think like sometimes I certainly, there is a group of students of color that were coming in and had responsibilities. There are people from many different backgrounds that just had family responsibilities that, maybe folks didn't simply, like you said, maybe disconnect or didn't understand or couldn't see past the realities of every individual person's life. And I think the fact that you nonetheless did it is so inspiring. Helped family out, went through law school. I know how difficult first year was. So to add on top of that working, my goodness, Denisse, like that is a superwoman sort of effort, right? So you weren't able, I imagine, similar to high school, then you didn't really do a lot of extracurricular or associations or clubs or like trial team, any of that stuff, right? People talk all the time about how important it is in law school to network, to be involved in all these other areas. What did you do since you didn't have the time to get involved in trial team or any of those things, unless I'm mistaken. What did you do to be able to form connections in the legal community?
What's interesting is I get invited often by Loyola Law School to speak at orientation, and they get upset with me because I say this. I'm like, I was a hustler.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, awesome.
I was a hustler in law school, and what I mean by that is I knew that I had to work, right? But I like to think that I was very clever of the places that I would go and work at. I mean, certainly working at Johnny Cochran's firm, helping out with police misconduct cases as a law clerk has helped me, right, in my career, my trajectory. But I was very big about networking and making sure that every, for example, Mexican American Bar Association event or Latino Lawyers Association event that I could go to, depending on the pros and cons.
Well, you're already working in missing class anyways, right? So,
I made sure to go and network and create a community for myself that certainly, you know, once I hung that shingle, the fruits of all those years of and I should really stop saying hustling. I feel like if my mom hears this and understands, she's gonna be like, "Can you stop saying that?" All those years of las palancas, okay, of getting, you know, using my palancas and making sure that my community was vast. I certainly reaped the fruits of that labor once I opened up my own law firm. Yeah.
That's great. And I love that because there's so many different ways of going about this. You know? For example, for me, I didn't do like any of that in law school. I didn't network or any of that. In part because of the commute. I never had time to do anything other than like go to school and go back home. But I think it's so important to let people know that there are all these different ways for you to like be able to find the dream job that you want or go into the career that you want or whatever. And different personalities as well, right? And so it's hearing all the different ways people to go about it and then go for it.
And I was also clever, I like to think clever, about the classes that I chose. For example, I didn't do the trial team, I took trial advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't do moot court, I did appellate advocacy.
So you got it anyway.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I think clever is selling yourself short. I think that was something that was really wise to do because, yes, you're using what is at your disposal. I was recently talking to a student, and some very similar sort of advice that I was giving her was, you know, look at this as an opportunity, right? Whatever classes can put you, whether it's an externship that can put you into a firm, right? Maybe it's difficult for you or whatever situation. Use classes, use whatever's available to you in school to get the experience that you need. It's there.
Right.
Okay. We're going to fast forward again because of time, but just Gastélum Law. How did that... Sometimes people hear about that, both of us side right now.
I know.
It's a scary thought. Yeah, many people would like to, I think, and there's a lot of fear, right? Because there's a lot of risk. Now it's all on you, but there's also the whole business, right? It's and law school doesn't teach you about business. Why did you decide to go out on your own? When was that in your career? And what did you do to prepare for it, and kind of what advice you give to people? So let's start with, you know, when was it and why did you decide to do it?
I think we've kind of talked about this a little bit here and there. We kind of joked about it earlier. I feel like part of my DNA is being the captain of my own ship. There's not a bar association. I was president of my sorority at UCLA. Usually if I'm on the board of a bar association, depending on the bar association, I will become president of that bar association at one point.
Mark it down.
And obviously you're joking, Ray, the checkbox. It's this feeling like, well, I think I could take this organization to the next level because of these ideas I have. You see?
Yeah, certainly not a positional thing, right? It's like you want to affect change.
Yeah. That's what I mean. Depends on the bar association and how passionate I am about that specific organization. And I want to say it was probably, I went on my own when I was at about 10 years of practicing law. However, at the 7th year mark of me being an attorney, I started to feel that that wanting to hang my own shingle, to be the captain of my own ship, to have my own law firm. But that's also when the pandemic hit, right? That's also where there was, some familial issues that were going on, some familial obligations that were going on that, made me think, let me take a pause, if you will. Certainly the fear of hanging your shingle, of being responsible for bringing in cases, doing good by the families who hire you, things of that nature. And I've talked about this in other, other times I've given presentations, but it's an important point that I want to make. One of my favorite Steve Jobs quote is, here I go again.
Go for it. Go for it.
That it's, you're supposed to wake up every single morning and look at yourself in the mirror and ask this question: if what I am about to go and do today, does that bring me joy? Does that make me happy? Does that bring me some kind of level of fulfillment?
Yeah.
And when the answer is no, too many days in a row, that's when you're supposed to do something about it, right? I mean, of course, we're all human beings. Look, I don't wake up every day and say like, oh my God, I love life. I am so happy. Yes. Some days you're just like, oh my God. All right, here we go. With one foot out, one step at a time. But I really love that quote because it speaks to boredom.
Right.
It speaks to not being happy with status quo. It speaks to not wanting to be complacent, not wanting to be mediocre. You see, it speaks to all of that.
Yeah.
And that's why I had to kind of give you a little bit of a background regarding the pandemic.
Yeah.
Some familial obligations that were added to my plate, because the answer to that question was no for 3 years straight.
Yeah.
Right. And so once circumstances started changing around me and for me, I did decide to hang my shingle. And I remember it was a very scary thing for a good 6 months thereafter. I had insomnia like ain't nobody's business, right? And I remember even being told a few things like, oh, you just wanted to be the Denisse show.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
And I recently, when I talked about that, I remember saying, well, that sounds like a pretty good damn show to me.
Nah.
Right?
Yeah.
I remember also thinking, would that question be asked of a man? Kenny, you just wanted to be the Kenny show.
Yeah. Well, I did, so I'm just kidding.
No.
Yeah.
But it hits a little different. I'm not quite sure that would be asked of a man, right? And then I was also, a lot of gaslighting, if you will, but I was asked, how was I? It was not an ask, it was more so pointing out. They were like, D, respectfully, I don't think you appreciate how difficult it's going to be for you to get cases, right? And I remember thinking, oh no, I don't just appreciate how difficult it might be. That's something I'm thinking about every single day since I vocalized out loud this wanting of hanging the shingle, right? Yeah. But, God is good, right? When I opened up my firm January 2nd and I announced it to my community, the calls just started coming in, right?
And I think to your point, Denisse, as well, I love that you mentioned that. And the reality is that sometimes folks who depend, let's say like in your case, right? Like you're at that time, isolated from today, at that time, you were a very valuable member of wherever you were, right? So it's one of these where like people sometimes depend on you, and it's important for you to remain where you're at, and people sometimes are a little nasty, right? And say the incorrect things because for selfish reasons,
right?
And so I think that your resilience through that, again, is another example of that, and the outpouring of support that you received, I think, is just a confirmation and a stamp on two things. One, your ability and skill as an attorney, right? And two, who you are as an individual as well. And that certainly hasn't stopped since.
Yeah, thank you, Barry. I appreciate that. I'm sure, you share in this sentiment. As I always say, like, I will always bet on Denisse.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's not this like arrogance or cocky way. It's just more so I know my capabilities. I know how much I want things. You and I mentioned this earlier, like, I will outwork you.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so the betting on myself and this continued betting on myself, I think has also brought me to this, thankfully to God, beautiful place I'm at right now in my career.
Yeah. And it's the type of attitude a client would want in their attorney. You don't want your attorney to be like, I don't know if I'd bet on myself. No, you do. And it's not, I don't think it's arrogance. It is the appropriate and healthy amount of confidence in who you are as well. And it's needed. Seeing your firm continue to grow, the hires that you're making, I mean, it's so exciting to watch everything that you're doing. So congratulations on everything. One final thing before we close this off is, I know one thing, I try to think of a word that I could describe our guests with. And with you, I didn't have to think too much because it's already a word that you use all the time, right? Imparable, right? That Denisse Gastélum is unstoppable. What does that mean to you? I have an understanding of kind of what that word is when I think of you, but what does that mean? Why do you use it a lot, like that you are imparable, you are unstoppable? What does that mean to you?
Yeah. It's something that I have said, I do say still to myself in the mirror, and I tell other people, it's the Eres Imparable. To me, it's this reminder, dare I say a necessary reminder to myself or to whoever it is I'm speaking to, it might be in an audience, that you're unstoppable, right? Mm-hmm. Don't let fear stop you. Don't let other people stop you. Don't let your insecurity stop you. More importantly, don't let other people's insecurity stop you, right? And just sky's the limit, right? That's important. And I think, frankly, it's this necessary reminder that I say to myself, right?
Uh-huh.
I'm really big on this whole looking at yourself in the mirror and doing the Wonder Woman, Superwoman stance, right? There's a lot of psychology behind it.
Yeah.
And I for sure say out loud, and I'm sure my husband walks by sometimes like, what? There she goes, talking to herself again.
Yeah.
And I'm like, Eres Imparable. We ourselves have to be our biggest cheerleaders as well.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's just my reminder to myself, you're unstoppable. Keep at it. Keep going.
It's so important to tell that to yourself as well, because if you're not going to do it, who's going to, especially in those difficult moments. I think of unstoppable for you in particular, because sometimes we think of this immovable force. Nothing's going to move it. It's just it's great, it's strong, it's big, but that's not quite you, because that's a stationary thing, right? And it doesn't move, the immovable object, right? Whereas you are something that keeps moving. Right? It's not going to be...
Appreciate that.
Yeah, it's not going to be moved just to the left, to the right. I mean, whether it's, in life, whether it's in the legal world, wherever it is that you are moving forward, it's unstoppable, right? And when I think of that word, when I think of you, that's what I think of, right? It's not an immovable force in that it's not stationary. It is in movement at all times. Yeah. So with that, the unstoppable Denisse Gastélum, thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us today, sharing of your story, opening yourself up a bit. Thank you for that. I know that's something that's going to be inspiring for so many of the people, young people as well, that are listening, watching this. One final thing is that we'll ask everybody to like, follow, subscribe, and to leave any reviews or comments. We'll see you in the next episode of The Art of Purpose.
Thank you, Kenny. This was great.